Hello chess friends and welcome to the Out of Chess channel and welcome back to our Queen's Gambit Decline series. So in this series we're following this very nice opening from White's and from Black's perspective, and today we're continuing with our Queen's Gambit Decline series again with our Semi-Tarrasch Defense. So the Semi-Tarrasch Defense I've explained so far in our introduction video. Today we're analyzing the Semi-Tarrasch Defense from White's and from Black's perspective, but with a thematic idea with this central breakthrough. So the central breakthrough I've introduced to you in our introduction video as a thematic subject that can happen in the Semi-Tarrasch Defense. So if you want to have a better understanding of this particular video, please also check out the introduction video, because some of the things that I've said and mentioned in the introduction video will be not mentioned again maybe in this video, so maybe you're not understanding everything. So it's very important to watch this series combined from introduction video, part 1, part 2, part 3, and so on. So as I said, here under the number of 5 and 6 we have talked in our introduction video about central breakthroughs to create a pass pawn, but also central breakthroughs to create a bad bishop position in Black's on Black side of the board. So this will be now our subject today, of course with some other different ideas, different sidelines, but that will be the main subject of this video, because there are many strategical ideas, so like the simplification and clarification ideas, central control versus queenside pawn majority. So all of the things we have talked about in our introduction video, now with using simply this main subject now, this central breakthrough as the main theme. So here of course let's check out what's again the Semi-Tarrasch Defense of the Queen's Gambit Decline. We have now the move d4, knight to f6, c4. We have here now the counter Nimzo Indian setup, but here the game transposed into the Queen's Gambit Decline, and the first instructive game that we're analyzing today, it's a brilliant gameplay by the world champion Magnus Carlsen against Anish Giri back from the 2020 Chessable Masters tournament. I think it was an incredible game here by the world champion, in which he introduced to us a very cool gambit line to create this bad bishop situation that we have mentioned under the number 6 of our most important strategical elements of the Semi-Tarrasch Defense. So see, here we have now the normal Queen's Gambit Decline setup, knight to c3, the 3 knights variation, and now comes the Semi-Tarrasch move, which is of course the move c5. This is now a simplification, clarification idea. As I said, Black hopes for here to get a clear fight situation in the center. Releasing the pressure is always good for Black. Getting the equalish line is of course a good idea. So we have here now the move c5, we have c takes d5, and again we're analyzing this line, knight to d5, and White doesn't want to tolerate this centralized knight. Play simply e4, knight takes c3, b takes c3, and again b takes c3. After move c takes d4, we have now c takes d4, and now bishop to b4, creating this check, bishop to d2, bishop takes d2, and now after move queen to d2 we have reached now again our cornerstone position. This position we're analyzing of course in the continuation of the game. I'm talking so much about this Semi-Tarrasch Defense, especially about this exchange variation, because many times many of you have also written to me, do you have problems in this particular line? And I had my trouble too in order to find good ideas here for White, especially while playing as White. I got crushed many times in these structures, because as I mentioned it before in our introduction video, again I'm pointing out, we have here now the pawn central control versus pawn majority on the queenside game. So it means now White is obviously again this dominant position in the center of the board, which means now this 2 versus 1 situation in the center, but Black is also a 2 versus 1 situation on the queen side. Again I'm pointing out that also we have talked about in our previous video, Black's main goal in this types of structure can be simply to go into favorable endgame. So it means now again I'm pointing out, if these pieces are traded off, if the game ends maybe without the rooks, without the queens, without the knights, without the bishops on the board, then of course Black should be probably much better in the potential endgame, because he can create the distant pass pawn, and that's something that bothers I think White always through the game. So that's why in the continuation of the game White should stay with the pieces, with many pieces on the board, in order to create further dynamics. If many pieces are traded off, if the game goes into an endgame, then Black should be probably better. So that's why we're analyzing discussing now the most important strategical elements. As I said, today's subject is the strategical element of central breakthroughs in order to create a pass pawn, and central breakthroughs in order to create a bad bishop situation. So that central breakthrough is of course only possible for white. So it means now we want to play the move d5. d5, the result of a potential d5 move can be this one: d5, e takes d5, and then of course e takes d5 would create the pass pawn for white in the continuation of the game. But an early pass pawn, creating an early pass pawn in an early stage of the game would be very, very risky, because if you do that, of course, with many pieces on the board, then black can attack the position, black can maybe create a blockade against this isolated pawn, and eventually can also maybe grab the pawn, and if you lose then the pawn, then you will probably lose the game. One of the main ideas also that we have talked about, I have written here under the number 6, central breakthrough to create bad bishop position, which means now many times, let's see now a possible continuation here after move castling, bishop to c4, knight to d7, castling, and now we have here now the move b6. The problem I think always in black's game is the light square bishop, and the light square bishop can be of course developed on this diagonal, but here you see in this great example by Magnus Carlsen against Anish Giri that Magnus Carlsen will play now the move d5, and after e takes d5, when the bishop is here on b3, will simply pass through with the move e5, and then will create a bad bishop situation. The bishop will be blocked out by its own pawn. So that's now the main idea here in this particular game. So as I said, the central breakthrough that we can create with the move d5 can of course the result of the central breakthrough can be creating this pass pawn on the d file, but can be also to create a bad bishop situation in black's position. So let's check out now this brilliant example by Magnus. Magnus played now rook to d1, first centralizing the pieces, rook to e1, we have a rook to c8, and now bishop to b3, we have a rook to e8, and now rook to e3, we have knight to f6, and now this idea, as I said, the move d5. d5 is of course very well attacked here by black's pawn, by all of these pieces of blacks, but here Magnus Carlsen's idea was after move e takes d5 here to simply pass through now with the move e5, which was a brilliant idea, because after move knight to e4, here Magnus played simply queen to e1, and we have now, as I said, a bad bishop position in black's camp, because black's light square bishop is simply blocked out by its own pawn. Now Magnus can use this squares maybe in order to get this knight here, can play also f4, and is now relying simply on this 4 versus 3 pawn majority on the king side. But the problem is now this pawn, and that's why here in the continuation of the game after move queen to c7, still you can play knight to d4, because Magnus built this very powerful battery. His maneuver to play rook to e3, then queen to e1 was a very powerful idea, because you cannot take, of course, rook to e5 or queen to e5 are not working, because after will happen you have to move the knight, and then you lose a heavy artillery piece here on the e file. So that's why you should not simply take the pawn. So after move knight to d4, you see mission accomplished, although the engine gives you equal chances for both sides. My stockfish engine at home likes also black's position, the evaluation is 0.0, but I would always love to play more here white's position, because the knight is centralized now. f4 will happen, maybe we can also sneak in with the queen, the rook can be maneuvered here maybe to h3, then we can also create some checkmate threats on the h file. So the activity I think of white pieces is much better, although white is down a whole pawn, you see, but as I mentioned, it was with a clear idea to get this bad bishop strategy here. This bishop on b7 is simply useless piece. On the other hand, white's light square bishop is of course attacking here this long diagonal, and that was actually now the main goal of this pawn breakthrough. This pawn breakthrough could have also the result of the pawn breakthrough could have been also the pass pawn, but here Magnus Carlsen played simply on this bad bishop strategy. So here a6, we have now h4 immediately. Magnus is attacking the king side, because he has here of course a 4 versus 3 pawn majority. It's an obvious attack. We should of course create chances where we have the more pawns on the board. Now here with the move h4, Magnus wants to create of course further weaknesses, especially if he manages maybe to get his pawn here to h6, then black would probably have to play something like g6, and then there are several several dark problems here also in front of black's king. So here after move h4, we have rook to d8, f3, kicking away the knight, and now h5, simply pushing the pawn further. We have now knight to e6 and now knight to f5. That's what I meant. You should not trade pieces when you're on white side. If you trade more pieces, if the game gets more and more simplified, I've talked about this idea in our introduction video, if the game becomes more and more simplified, black is much better. So that's why Magnus doesn't want to trade any more pieces. He plays now centralized move here with the move knight to f5. Now queen to g3 will happen, and the queen will sneak in, of course, here, and we can also continue our pressure against this weak g7 pawn. So here we have d4 by Magnus, we have by Giri, we have rook to d3, knight to c5, rook takes d4, we have rook takes d4, rook takes d4, knight takes b3, and here a cool move by Magnus Carlsen. He doesn't want to take immediately the knight. He threatens, of course, first of all the checkmate. And now again, I'm pointing out, you can be the judge of this position, although now the bishop is open. Finally Anish Giri managed to liberate his bishop, but still this knight is much better, dancing here like this in front of black's king, combined with the queen, creating this very powerful checkmate threat. So that's why the knight, especially in this position, is much better. So that's why g6 by Anish, we have a takes b3, and now rook to d8. The problem is now you cannot take. That's the main issue, because you get simply this one. We can takes, and you get checkmated here with the move rook to d8. The knight is controlling the escape route for the king. Black can never escape here on g7. So after move a takes b3, rook to d8, brilliant move again by Magnus Carlsen. e6 again with the discovered attack. Even if you take, again you get checkmated here. That's why we have a queen to c1, we have king to h2, rook takes d4. Now brilliant move by Magnus. You cannot go behind here. In the continuation, we have now queen to c8, we have a queen to e5. Really brilliant game by Magnus. You can only play this one, rook to h4, but now after king to g3 in this position, Anish Giri resigned. There are no good checks, and you cannot prevent anymore here this pawn to march. We can in the continuation play also here knight to d6, king to h4 is also opportunity to, in this position, as I said, Anish Giri resigned. So brilliant ideas. Let's go back to the setup. After bishop to b4, bishop to d2, bishop takes d2, queen to d2. We have seen now first centralizing the pieces, and now after move rook to c8, bishop to b3, rook to e8, now rook to e3, now d5. Brilliant idea. After e takes d5, now e5. That's the main goal. You see now the bishop is blocked out. We can play queen to e1, and now knight to d4. Brilliant setup by the world champion. Now f3, kicking away the knight, and then h4, h5. We have seen this was a brilliant attack. So let's check out now another example with the similar ideas, but now we have this idea to create a pass pawn on the d file. It's a great gameplay by Vasily So against Vladimir Kramnik. Also we have the Semi-Tarrasch. Again, the white doesn't want to tolerate here the knight in the center of the board. Knight takes c3, b takes c3, c takes d4, bishop to b4, bishop to d2, takes, and now again bishop to c4, knight to d7 castling, again centralizing the rooks. Very important ideas here. And now after rook to c8, bishop to b3, again rook to e8, now h3, again similar ideas, creating first some breathing spaces. And now after move knight to f6, queen to f4, we have a couple of perpetuals, but now finally queen to h2 here by Vasily So. We have now d5, again e takes d5, but now e takes d5. Here in this particular position, Vasily So didn't play this idea, although it could be also possible. I see also a great game in the database in which black won the game. We'll explain also that game. Here in the continuation of the game, we have e5, also to create this very annoying pawn, and now again with same ideas to play knight to d4, and again create this bad bishop which would be blocked out by its own pawn. But here Vasily So decided to play different ideas. After move e takes d5, rook to e1. You have to take with the knight in order to stay with the good protection of your pawn on d5. And here after move queen to f6, knight to d3, we have now bishop to a6, queen to e5, bishop takes, queen takes h5, we have bishop to c2, rook to c1, bishop to f5, takes, and now simply pushing the pawn further. You cannot take, of course, because of the weakness here on f7, so that's why first g5, we have queen to d1, bishop to d7, queen to d5, and here after a couple of checks, both players traded some pawns and the game eventually ended in the draw. So this game is a great example, and it's almost a perfect game because here in this game the centi-pawn loss was only 4 for Vasily So and only 5 for Vladimir Kramnik, which was almost a perfect game, as I said. So that's why we should not say that anyone played bad here. Of course, Vasily So lost his centralized pawn, which was his main strategical element, but also Vladimir Kramnik lost his queenside pawn because many times black has the advantage on the queen side. Black has a 2 versus 1 pawn majority, so Vladimir Kramnik also lost a very important pawn, so the game eventually ended in a draw. So that's, I think, something that we should be always notice in semi-Tarrasch structures. The potential idea of white to create this d5 move, you have to be aware of that. As I said, there are ideas to get a pass pawn, very annoying pass pawn, or to create this bad bishop situation, which of course here wasn't played, but was introduced to us by this great gameplay by Magnus Carlsen. So let's check out now this example, the similar game, but with a different outcome, in which here we have Margarita Potapova against Ning Caillou. Here Potapova played after move queen to d2, again bishop to c4. Again we have the same setup, again centralizing first the rooks, supporting both of the pawns. Here again rook to c8, bishop to b3, here h3, knight to f6, protecting first, of course. Now queen to h2, and now after h6 we have now again this idea, d5. After e takes d5 we have now e5, passing through, but here after g6 finally black tried to consolidate, tried also to get maybe this knight here on g7, then of course also to f5, where it could be a great protective piece. Here knight to d4, now we have this idea, but black plays very actively with the queen. We have now g4, and now knight to g7, queen to g3, knight to e6. Of course, as we said, black wants always to simplify the game by trading off more pieces, because if that happens, let's see possible continuation. Knight to e6, f takes e6, and again black can rely simply on this extra pawn, but also on this queenside pawn majority. So that's why white never should trade more pieces. So here after move knight to e6 we have f4, knight takes d4, rook to d4, we have queen to c7, we have king to h2, and now of course this idea queen to c3 again. I think black has now a very good position, because black can again trade further pieces. We have queen to c3, rook to c3, f5, g takes f5, g takes f5, rook to f3, attacking the pawn, f6, and now finally rook takes f6. It's obviously now a much better game. White lost a very important pawn, and black won the game eventually. So I don't want to show you now the whole game. You can also check out that game. It will be in the description below. Maybe analyze some different ideas, different opportunities. The most important thing is that you don't panic. If you get something, you have to be aware of the most important strategical ideas. Again, I'm pointing out here, for instance, under the number 7, trading pieces can be a strategical element for black. As we saw here, black wanted to trade many pieces. He wanted to trade the rooks, he wanted to trade the queens, he wanted to trade the bishops, because still he can always rely on his 2 versus 1 pawn majority in order to reach maybe a favorable endgame stage. So that's why don't panic when you maybe get a central breakthrough by white or something, because it's time to regroup, time to find the best squares on the board, try to release the pressure, trading off pieces, undermine the pressure. So as I said, it's something that we should always be always consider and always try when we're playing, especially as black. So I hope that you really like these ideas. I hope that you enjoyed this video. As I said, please check out the introduction video. We have explained also some ideas a little bit deeper than in this video. Here I think you should watch the series combined introduction video, part 1, part 2, part 3, and so on. In the continuation of our series, we'll analyze also some different ideas for white and for black, especially with this queenside pawn majority attack that black can also create. So it will be, I think, a very cool series. So okay, if you want to see more about the Tarrasch defense, Defense, here's our previous analyzed video. And if you want to study more about the Queen's Gambit decline, here's also the link of our whole playlist. And if you have trouble maybe to play against e4, check out my hyper accelerated Dragon Sicilian Defense series as a good response. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.